the pandemic, as bad as it was, the good thing it happened is it woke up people to the power of technology, and it became important and necessary for learning. So now the bigger problem is sustainability.
Hey everyone, once again, this is another episode of The Business of Education, and I'm your host, Kyle Walgren. We're bringing you another episode from ISTE, and today our guest is Dr. Sheryl Abshire. Has a 3-page letter of everything that she's accomplished, from Teacher of the Year to being inducted into the National Teacher Hall of Fame, Computer Using Educator of the Year, Louisiana Technical Teacher of the Year, and on and on.
Very busy, Kyle. Been very busy.
It's not always that people want to dive into technology and adopt it so quick. So to see that you've done this, for a big portion of your career and really promoted it is what made us want to talk to you, because convincing teachers, users within the classroom that technology is good is sometimes a really hard thing to do. And this is what you did for a living.
Well, it's been a journey, and I was fortunate from the very early years with the existence of technology to begin as it was just being materialized. When people were like, we're not going to do this. This is going to go away like everything else. But I think the fortunate thing for me was to realize the implications to really innovate using this technology, but to transform education on a monumental basis. And I was lucky to work in a school district that supported me, to have principals that gave me the lead, gave me the funding, and quite frankly, trusted me, because a lot of the innovation that goes on in technology is about trust. You've got to build trust up and down the chain. When you become a leader, the superintendent, the school board has to trust you, but you also have to have principals and teachers that trust you to make good decisions that will impact the learning they're being accountable for.
One of the things that I hear all the time, working with teachers and trying to bring in new technologies, is they have very little bandwidth as is, and we're always stacking one more thing on top of them for them to learn. What are some of the things that you learned to grow that teacher adoption earlier? How do you find and identify a champion of technology? A lot of our audience is EdTech founders, and this is the hardest problem they have. How'd you go about doing it?
Well, the interesting thing about that question is, quite frankly, it's a lot easier today than it was in the early days, because it was really experimental and there was no value proposition that you could bring to a teacher or a principal or a superintendent and a board to say invest, because technology is an investment, not only in your time, as you said, because teachers are already overburdened, but an investment in terms of funding and human resources. So I think in the early days, it was hard to do it because of that experimental status. I think today that technology has become so ubiquitous in the world that everybody has a cell phone. Everybody's ordering, especially after the pandemic, everybody's ordering on Amazon. They're using technology to ease the burdens of life. So when you introduce something to a teacher or curriculum, academic officer, and say, this is going to make learning more efficient, it's going to improve the learning outcomes, because we're all about outcomes in schools, learning outcomes for students, and it's going to be easier for teachers to do their job, then I think if we can bring those points to bear around what's important, how will students learn, will this make a difference, and unfortunately, how will this improve the massive accountability factors that we have in place nationally, at the state and the local level, because we have to meet those points. And technology has been a very, very strong supporter and accomplice of improving student learning.
I like that. Accomplice. I haven't heard that used that way, but I really like it. Obviously COVID helped bring technology or be adopted. But one of the things, so that's when my company was founded, was during COVID. I was one of those like, oh, this is the need I have today. So, uh, but we're fortunate that the niche we dove into, literacy rates, is something that needs a lot of help. Um, but there's been a lot of like poor applications put out in front of people where they spent hours wasting their time. And now, as we're in this building with probably thousands of EdTech companies trying to sell into the same schools, what's something that makes one stand out or makes it special where you're like, I'm going to dive into this a little bit and take a look at it?
Well, I think the big differentiator, Kyle, is does a system, does a software, does a solution provide ease of use for the master in the classroom? And that's what teachers are.
Mm-hmm.
They're the master lead learners, they're the master facilitators. So, ease of adoption, support for people like myself as a
Mm-hmm.
former chief technology officer. So I used to say, I need a neck to get my hands wrapped around. Who can I squeeze their neck that's going to quickly respond to my action, especially if you're looking at enterprise level software across the district. So I think that's important. Then the other thing is the ability, I think today, because we've had such huge gaps in learning. Some people call it learning loss. I like to say gaps in learning that occurred because of, I think a lot of it was brought to bear. The pandemic, it was kind of like the Wizard of Oz. We peeked behind the curtain,
Right.
and we saw, oh, these kids can't do that. They can't fake it till they make it anymore. So the ability to differentiate and personalize learning in a
I love
way
that.
that's easy for teachers to use, understandable for students to be able to build their learning prowess, and more importantly, that parents can buy into. One of the things I think a lot of people don't realize that are out of education is that during the pandemic, we had a mass influx of parent involvement. They sat at the shoulder of their students and they watched education take place. Prior to that,
They didn't pay a whole lot of
they were,
attention.
if they were in middle school and high school, don't call me, well, I'll call you. Now, elementary parents, they're all in there, what are we doing? Signing the papers. Middle and high school, the kids are mom and dad, none of your business. But when we all went remote, none of your business didn't work because mom and dad were in the middle of it.
Right.
So I think that parent support, understanding, and the fact that we have to be transparent about that now has been a critical piece that has evolved and become much stronger.
Do you think we're seeing? I love that you said that. So I'm in reading, but it's very important that the administration, the teacher, and the parent is all involved in this learning process, just for children to really grow at a level that you can gauge. Literacy rates are falling year after year in America. Do you feel like that parent engagement stayed when we all went back to in class, or do you think they wiped their hands of it right away and they're like, here, you're back on the teacher's problem? What are you seeing from a parent involvement so far, 2 or 3 years out?
I think it's a mixed bag. I really do. I think we've seen a regression back to the what we don't want to be the norm of older level students, because I hear from parents and school administrators and educators I work with around the country, parents were worn out. I mean,
Yeah.
in some school districts where they kept kids out of school longer, they were like, we don't care, take them. Take them back.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're seeing is districts trying to do a better job of having reasonable parent involvement. Now, we've gone over the edge some places where we've got a few parents that think that they're in charge of the school libraries and that every book they should read and decide if their children should read it. And being a former librarian, I'm a little appalled at what's happening some places. But, we have to deal in education with the hand we're dealt. And so measuring parent engagement involvement, in a reasonable manner, being transparent, and having the skills to communicate what we're doing and involve parents is going to be a win-win for us in education every single time.
The I can't agree with you more. Having parents involved, I think, is going to be the missing link. And you're right. Especially we could dive down 100 rabbit holes, but when the nuclear home started changing the involvement in the class, obviously fell short when you have to have two parents working just to keep the lights on. So, I feel like education from my studies started, taking a step back from the parents' engagement there, which then ultimately put more responsibility onto the teacher to try and pick up the weight of somebody else
to do everything.
Yeah.
We have to do everything.
That being said, you've been in education for 40 years. You saw the bottleneck and the challenges of bringing internet into the classroom. Now you're seeing the challenge of generative AI. What are some things that you're like, oh, I've seen this problem before, and how you got through them? And what are some problems where you're like, oh, this is going to be a new experience to try and get some buy-in here?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been excited about things in education for my entire career because I'm just an extremely positive person. But I don't believe, Kyle, I've been more excited and more energized by anything other than what I've seen with generative AI. And people, talk to me about this, and I do a lot of speaking around the country. Here, I did a forum with over 300 people about AI. And one of the things that I've seen that it does something that we in education, whether we're in a leadership role or a support role, have not been able to do. And that's give teachers more time.
More time back.
Give teachers time, give administrators time, give district offices more time, because some of the routine rote things that we do, we've been able to automate and personalize with Chat GPT. The first time I logged in, I was like, oh, where have you been all my life, baby? Where have you been when I was a principal, or a teacher? And so I'm pretty much a fan, but it's also somewhat a cautionary tale, because we've got to be very careful with student data privacy.
Right.
We have to make sure that the cybersecurity aspects of that are well intentioned by the companies that provide it, and that they're able to articulate and support what our needs are. Because in the recent COSN leadership survey, for the 6th year in a row, people in tech leadership positions around this country indicated the number one priority and concern they had was cybersecurity. So if you blend all of the AI products and cybersecurity, we've got to be very thoughtful about how we engage and pursue and adopt.
Right.
And I think it's easier because I think companies, our vendor partners, are aware of that, and the really good ones that are going to make it and that will sustain this are people that pay attention to that and listen to the concerns of educators and are prepared to respond in kind quickly and pivot. Because generative AI, what it is today, Kyle, next week it's going to be different. I can't even imagine in 3 years what we're going to see. I told some folks the other day where I was speaking, oh, there's lots of things I lament, but I told somebody, I said, I was born 50 years too soon, because what's going to happen in the next 3, 5, 10 years, I think is going to be the one tool that's truly going to transform education and make it student-centric, learner-centric, and I think it's going to be a big celebration.
I agree with you. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody on the customizable learning journeys that generative AI is going to be able to bring to the table. And I'm in literacy because I was something I struggled with. I was a poor reader.
Good for you.
And I didn't want my kids to go through those same things. So, but when I was learning how to read, it was like Charlotte's Web and, Old Yeller. And then, I'm looking at books today and it's still Charlotte's Web and Old Yeller. And I'm like, my grandparents read this book. Now with Gen AI, we can find a book that individual is interested in and have a better shot at bringing somebody into becoming somebody that loves reading necessary than somebody that's just forced to read when they have to, right?
Well, and the whole concept around an interest inventory for students and being able to target that, again, is going to be easier than it's ever been because that takes a lot of time to personalize. You have a classroom full of 30 second graders. I taught second grade,
Mm-hmm.
which is the beginning of a child's reading literacy journey.
Right.
All the research tells us if a student cannot read aptly by third grade, we've got a problem.
Yep.
Because it will impact their entire lives.
And there's studies that show they make projections on how many prison cells are going to be needed in 10 years based off third grade reading levels at that time. So,
I believe it's true. So now what do we have? What is our challenge? But I would say, what is our opportunity to
right.
be able to use technology to build these literacy competencies in ways that not every teacher is a literacy master.
Right.
They may not have, their degree may not be in early childhood education or reading, but looking at the teacher dilemma and shortage around our country, there are school districts that, oh, can you pass this test? Wait, can you do the background check? Wait, pulse? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get you started and we'll get you certified. When I began teaching, it was very difficult to get a teaching job because there were so many people. But what's happened in our country is this, unfortunately, public lack of respect for educators. And so
100%.
even educators are telling their kids, don't do what I did.
Yeah.
Don't be a teacher.
It's like almost 60% of teachers today will tell you they regret becoming a teacher. After the pandemic, it was this huge exodus. Nobody wanted to go back, and then everybody, they were getting blamed for everything.
So we have to make teaching more attractive, but more importantly, we have to make learning more effective and easier so that these people can come into a classroom. And I would submit to you, with the technology tools we have available, we can do that if we're deliberate, if we plan, and if we involve the people who are responsible for learning, which is teachers, in many of the decisions and let them be true partners in making the decisions about district learning movements.
That's the approach that we've definitely taken. A lot of our team are former teachers that had bottlenecks, and as you can tell, the third thing we talk about is giving time back. On right now we've calculated we can save about 51 hours a year.
Get you some AI and you can give them a lot of time and you will be a superstar.
That number is probably closer to 150 hours a year.
That's the key.
Giving time back is obviously something that I want to be able to do. And I think that we can find a higher standard of acceptance just because we all have the difference of opinion, right? And some schools were passing kids because they needed the budget or, however that looked in the past, where technology is going to hold that standard a little bit higher. The new teachers coming in are going to feel comfortable because they have support, and then I think that teachers that have been around longer that, might have had it a sore spot are going to be like, hey, this is going to give me more time so I can actually focus on the stuff that I do better.
Well, if you can do that, then teachers truly can work one-on-one and individualize.
Right.
We have many, many students that English is a second language now. AI can solve that problem.
It does.
It can solve that problem. And when I began teaching, obviously there was no technology, but the students coming into our classroom today are radically different than they were even 5-10 years ago.
100%.
So we have to play to their learning styles, to their modalities. And technology is the perfect opportunity to do that. If we use it in the right way, we can engage students. Kids are not like, oh, I have to do this because the teacher said so anymore. Kids need to be engaged and learning has to be relevant.
Yeah.
And AI
100%.
will do that. The relevancy will erase many of our problems.
One of the things, what would you say one of the things over, the length of your career was one of the biggest challenges and accomplishments you've got in technology adoption as your role as chief technical officer throughout the school districts you've worked with?
Well, I think I would say unequivocally, one of my biggest challenges, and I hear it from my peers and my colleagues uh, for years, for decades, is funding.
Mm-hmm.
Funding, this stuff isn't free. And so it takes an investment by school district, by board, by superintendent, by leaders to say this is now a priority. When we began the internet, there was a lot of questions around whether we're going to do it or not. Well, now it's become a utility.
Yeah, we don't wonder about it anymore.
It's a utility. Okay, good. But prior to that pandemic, I mean, I worked diligently to try to find funds to put a device in every student's hands, as my peers did around the country. The pandemic came, the federal government threw money at school districts for technology because the outcry of every kid sitting at home. You know, I tell people often, because I do a lot of advocacy work in DC, that I have the scars on my knees from crawling to Washington, D.C., begging for technology money every year, speaking to Congress, testifying before the Senate and the House and the FCC. And the pandemic, as bad as it was, the good thing it happened is it woke up people to the power of technology, and it became important and necessary for learning. So now the bigger problem is sustainability, Kyle. How do we keep the momentum going? Because the federal dollars have evaporated.
Right.
And how are districts planning, building sustainability plans to cost shift what they're doing with money and cost shifting it to what their priorities are? So the verdict's still out in some places.
I think that we need, like, I was talking with the gentleman a few months ago on the show, and I was like, how can the government help? And his focus was like preparing teachers to come to the school
No doubt.
better, right?
No doubt.
Making sure the universities are getting them ready to come and hit the ground running. Like you said, technology was given to everybody and their dog when the pandemic hit, but then a lot of it really wasn't followed up on. And we've seen COVID funds get deployed. Now there's a lot of investigation where they deployed properly. You know, but I feel like the education system is its own worst nightmare sometimes. We were given, an opportunity to deploy technology.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't take full advantage of it. Now we're screaming again, when do we get some technology back, kind of thing, right? What are some things that us young EdTech entrepreneurs could come in and try and minimize that back and forth?
Well, good technology has a proof point. In other words, it's results driven. There are measurable outcomes. So as new companies come into the play, I think one of the best things they can do is say, we have a proof point. This makes a difference. We've got a use case. We've done beta testing with a district, and they will be a reference point for you, because as you said, we threw money at technology. Now we're circling the wagons.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at what the real use is. What can we sustain? What makes a difference? What truly impacts learning? And then there's going to be a consolidation that's going to happen. And you've seen it. There are companies that are leaving the landscape. There's acquisitions going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots right now.
There's lots of acquisitions. And so we're going to be looking for companies that have the proof point and can stand on the data that says we're not just fun. It's not just flashy. It's not good for kids to use. It's good for kids to learn. Right. And there's a difference between good to use and good to learn.
No, that's interesting. I haven't heard anybody say it that way before. One of the articles I was reading the other day was, now that the COVID money is drying up, the district that was looking at doing 1,100 layoffs because during COVID they hired 1,100 people.
And the government told them, do not put this one-time money into staffing, but people were desperate.
Right.
So they're having to rethink now, and that's unfortunate.
Do you think that technology is really going to move and take a bigger stance when we know that we're 1 year away from losing this funding, or I think it might even be done now?
Into this year.
do you think it's going to force a greater adoption of technology when they're trying to balance that budget and they're minimizing the overhead of staffing and trying to get the same results?
I think smart school districts are going to measure their own accountability about what their expectations are. Staff, lots of people were hired in to help remediate and bring kids back up to par.
Yep.
Well, some places that's happened, some places it hasn't happened. So I do think technology has a huge role to play in helping remediate individualized, customized learning for students if used properly. But companies that do that well should be shouting that from the rooftops.
Well, and that's why I like doing these conversations, is so I can
Get busy, Kyle. You got it.
get those good informations and pass it on to the other people that can utilize it. One of the things that I always end on is the importance of networking, and how do you utilize your network to make an impact in the work that you do. To a young entrepreneur, give them some advice early on that it took you a minute to learn about really growing your network.
Well, I think an important thing is being out in the field. As an example, we're here at the ISTE conference. There's 13, 14, 15,000 educators here, a show floor full of thousands of established companies and new people coming into the field, young educational entrepreneurs. So getting to know people in school districts that can give you sage advice, that are wise and will be realistic with you and not just say, oh, yeah, I'll try that out. There are people that are established in the field that are known, looking at Tech and Learning, Ed Week, these articles that they research and seek out change makers. These people are well known. They should be on Twitter. They should be looking for people on LinkedIn. They should.
I love
LinkedIn. You found me.
I love LinkedIn.
You reach out to those people and, ask them to participate in a webinar, ask them to take a call, and start to validate your work by practitioners that are already validated in their careers. The network, to me, is the most powerful thing. I would not be where I am today in any way, shape, or form if I hadn't joined ISTE as an educator, if I hadn't become very engaged in COSN, the Consortium for School Networking, became board chair, participated with the RTM network, just built relationships with people that help me. I say to people all the time, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I recognize that, and I am a humble woman because of those people. But the other thing I've done is I'm giving back and building, because the benches are getting thin, as you said. And I hope my legacy is other educators that say, Dr. Sheryl Abshire gave me a leg up, helped me, gave me an idea. In fact, I have a book that's coming out with ISTE. It's called The Savvy EdTech Leader.
Oh, wow.
And
when's it going to be out?
It'll be published in October, but it's on the ISTE website now with 3 of my colleagues, myself, Diane Dorsch, Frankie Jackson, and Donna Williamson, that we have over 120 years of experience in EdTech.
I'll make sure to put the link in the...
I'll send it to you. It's The Savvy EdTech Leader. Innovative ways to inspire and elevate and grow your career, because I see that as my role, to give back and help other young educators, because education, in my opinion, and certainly because I'm a fan of public education, is the economic engine that drives this country. And if we as a nation forget about that, we are doomed.
I'm about to give a TEDx talk on that exact topic next week, or actually Saturday. So,
well, I'll give you my quote. Public education is the economic engine that drives our economy.
I'm going to get that from you and put it in there.
Good.
So, and because I agree with it 100%. I think that ultimately, if we can just teach the basics, we can accelerate the growth and reduce crime and, reduce the amount of hate that we're seeing, especially in our political environments right now.
Absolutely.
Just because people don't understand, they don't know how to ask the right questions, and
the media is not where we
not
learn.
Our friend.
Whatever, doesn't matter who you believe.
They're all
CNN,
lying.
MSNBC, Fox News. That should not be our learning
Right.
modality.
No, for sure. I love to watch all three of them on the same article to see how different they all are, and not one of them aligns with the other. They're all just so different. It's so interesting to watch and see. But Dr. Abshire, I appreciate you coming on the show. You've got to give another talk today, so I'm not going to keep you very long, but I appreciate you. And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, if they had any questions, what's the best way for them to find you?
My email is pretty well known. It's cheryl.abshire@gmail.com. And I pretty much live on an iPhone and a computer. And I'm happy to help others as they move through their careers and other companies, because I really believe what is given, we should give back.
And she answers LinkedIn. That's how I got her here. So thank you. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Happy to be here.